My name is Sarah and I just turned 42. I should have been glowing with pride at my husband's promotion dinner, surrounded by his colleagues and their wives, celebrating 15 years of marriage and success. But instead, I found myself sitting in stunned silence as David raised his glass and delivered a 5-minute toast about his journey to senior partner without mentioning my name once. Something inside me finally snapped after years of being reduced to a footnote in my own life story. For 15 years, I had been the perfect corporate wife. I organized his networking dinners, remembered his colleagues' birthdays, sent thank-you notes in my perfect handwriting, and smiled graciously while he claimed credit for the life we had built together. I had abandoned my own career as a marketing director to support his legal aspirations, moved 3 times for his promotions, and turned down countless opportunities because they didn't fit into his timeline. But that night, as I watched him bask in the applause of his peers while I sat invisible at the corner of the table, I realized I had become a ghost in my own marriage. The woman who had once commanded boardrooms and launched successful campaigns had disappeared, replaced by someone whose only identity was being David's wife. When he finished his speech and the room erupted in congratulations, I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. I raised my wine glass high and said clearly, "To the invisible wife, who made all of this possible while slowly disappearing herself." The room fell silent. David's face turned pale. And for the first time in years, I felt completely visible. David and I met in law school, both ambitious and driven, planning to conquer the world together. We were equals then, study partners who challenged each other intellectually and supported each other's dreams. I had already accepted a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago, while he was set to join a corporate law practice in New York. Our early years were a careful negotiation of 2 careers, 2 sets of ambitions. We took turns making sacrifices, supporting each other through late nights and demanding bosses. When David got his first big promotion, I celebrated his success genuinely, believing we were building something together. The shift happened gradually, so subtly that I didn't notice it at first. David's career began demanding more of his time and energy, and somehow, mine started matching less. When he got offered a partnership track position that required relocation, we discussed my career only briefly before I agreed to move. When his firm needed a spouse to organize client events, I stepped in without question. By our 10th anniversary, the pattern was firmly established. David was the star, and I was the supporting cast. He made decisions, and I adapted. He pursued opportunities, and I enabled them. What had started as mutual support had become a one-way street, and I had been walking down it for so long that I forgot there was supposed to be traffic going both ways. The erosion of my identity began with small compromises that seemed reasonable at the time. When David's firm started hosting client dinners, I naturally took on the role of hostess. When he needed someone to manage his calendar and travel arrangements, I stepped in to help. When his career required longer hours and more travel, I gradually reduced my own commitments to pick up the slack at home. Each individual decision made sense in the moment. David's earning potential was higher than mine, his career trajectory seemed more stable, and his success would benefit both of us. But somewhere along the way, supporting his career became my full-time job, and my own professional aspirations became hobbies I pursued in my spare time. The warning signs were there, but I ignored them. Friends stopped inviting me to professional networking events, because I always declined. Former colleagues stopped reaching out, because I had nothing to contribute to conversations about industry trends. My own mother started introducing me as David's wife, instead of by my own name and accomplishments. By the time I realized what was happening, the pattern was so entrenched that challenging it felt impossible. David had grown accustomed to my support being unconditional and unlimited. His colleagues saw me as an extension of him, rather than an individual. Even I had started to define myself primarily in relation to his achievements, measuring my worth by how well I facilitated his success. The first major red flag came 3 years ago when David's firm was competing for a major client. The account required extensive entertaining, and I spent 2 months orchestrating dinner parties, golf outings, and cultural events. When David's team landed the account, he was promoted to senior associate and received a substantial bonus. At the celebration dinner, he thanked his team, his mentors, and even the firm's caterer, but never mentioned the months of unpaid work I had contributed. Last year, when David was invited to speak at a legal conference, I spent weeks helping him prepare his presentation, researching statistics, and practicing his delivery. The speech was a tremendous success, leading to several new speaking opportunities and media interviews. In every article written about him, he was described as a rising star who had single-handedly transformed his practice area. I watched him being interviewed on legal podcasts, discussing his unique approach to client relations, which was actually a strategy one had developed from my marketing background. The financial cost of my invisible labor was staggering. Over the past 5 years, I had turned down 3 job offers, including one that would have paid $80,000 annually. I had withdrawn from a master's program in digital marketing because David's travel schedule required me to be available for his needs. I had given up freelance consulting opportunities worth approximately $40,000 per year because they might conflict with his networking events. My friends started expressing concern about how I had changed. My college roommate, Jennifer, visited last Christmas and was shocked by how deferential I had become. "You used to be the one with opinions about everything," she said. "Now you just echo whatever David says." My sister noticed that I had stopped talking about my own interests and goals, that every conversation somehow circled back to David's career and achievements. Even David's colleagues began treating me differently. At firm events, I was seated with the other spouses, expected to discuss home renovation and vacation plans, while the lawyers talked about cases and industry developments. When I tried to contribute to professional conversations, I was politely redirected to spouse-appropriate topics. I had become a decoration in his professional life, present but not participating. The promotion dinner was held at the city's most exclusive restaurant, with 40 of the firm's partners, associates, and their spouses in attendance. I had spent the afternoon getting ready, choosing an outfit that would reflect well on David's new position, practicing the gracious smile I had perfected over years of corporate events. As dinner wound down, David stood to address the room. He thanked his mentors for their guidance, his colleagues for their collaboration, and his clients for their trust. He spoke about the long hours and personal sacrifices required to reach this milestone. He mentioned the late nights, the missed weekends, the dedication required to excel in such a competitive field. For 5 minutes, he painted a picture of a solitary journey, a self-made man who had achieved success through individual determination and talent. He spoke about his client relationships, his innovative strategies, and his vision for the future of the practice. The room was captivated by his eloquence and passion. As he raised his glass for the final toast, I felt something crack inside me. 15 years of marriage, countless hours of unpaid labor, years of my own dreams deferred, and I had been completely erased from his narrative. In that moment, I realized that to David and everyone in that room, I was nothing more than an attractive accessory to his success story. When the applause died down and David sat back down with a satisfied smile, I found myself standing before I had consciously decided to do so. My hand was shaking as I raised my wine glass, but my voice was steady when I spoke. To the invisible wife who made all of this possible while slowly disappearing herself. The silence that followed was deafening. David's smile froze on his face. The partners' wives looked at each other with wide eyes. I could feel 40 pairs of eyes staring at me, but for the first time in years, I didn't care about their judgment. I had finally spoken my truth. The car ride home was silent except for the sound of David's heavy breathing. When we reached our house, he exploded. "How could you embarrass me like that? In front of my partners? Do you have any idea what you've done to my reputation?" His anger was immediate and intense, but underneath it, I could see something else. Genuine confusion about why I was upset. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. The next morning, I called my sister and told her everything. She listened without interruption, then said simply, "It's about time." I also reached out to my former colleague, Monica, who had started her own marketing consultancy and had been asking me to freelance for her for months. The following week, I started seeing Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a therapist who specialized in relationship dynamics and personal identity. In our first session, she asked me to describe myself without referencing David or my role as his wife. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes, realizing I genuinely didn't know how to answer that question. David's initial response was to minimize the situation. He suggested couples counseling, promised to do better, and bought me expensive gifts. But when I insisted on individual therapy first and started setting boundaries around my time and energy, his tone changed. He accused me of being selfish, of not understanding the pressures of his career, of changing into someone he didn't recognize. I opened my own bank account and began tracking the monetary value of my contributions to David's career. I started charging him for event planning services at market rates, billing him for research and administrative work, and requiring advance notice for any commitments that involved my time. The financial transparency was eye-opening for both of us. 6 months after the dinner incident, our marriage looks completely different. David initially resisted every boundary I established, but as I consistently enforced them, he began to understand that I was serious about changing our dynamic. He started acknowledging my contributions publicly, crediting me in interviews, and introducing me by my own professional background rather than just as his wife. I accepted Monica's offer to join her consultancy and have been working part-time while rebuilding my professional confidence. The work feels foreign at first, using skills I hadn't exercised in years, but also deeply satisfying. I had forgotten the rush of solving complex problems and the satisfaction of seeing my ideas implemented successfully. Our conversations have become more balanced. Instead of me listening to David's work stories while sharing nothing of my own, we now exchange updates about our respective projects. He has started asking for my professional opinion on his cases, and I've begun sharing my own career goals and challenges. The most significant change has been in how we make decisions. Major choices about our time, money, and future now require genuine discussion and mutual agreement. David can no longer assume that I will automatically accommodate his career needs without considering the impact on my own goals. Some of David's colleagues have adjusted to seeing me as an individual rather than an extension of him. Others continue to treat me as a spouse accessory, but I no longer feel obligated to play that role. I participate in conversations that interest me and excuse myself from those that don't. Today, David and I are still married, but we're married as equals for the first time in years. The transformation hasn't been easy or comfortable, but it has been necessary. David had to confront the reality that his success was built on my invisible labor, and I had to reclaim my own identity and ambitions. The invisible wife still exists in many marriages, in many boardrooms, in many family dynamics where one person's dreams are considered more important than another's. But she doesn't have to stay invisible forever. Sometimes it takes a moment of painful clarity, a public declaration of worth, to begin the process of becoming visible again. If you recognize yourself in this story, if you've become the supporting character in your own life, know that it's never too late to raise your glass and toast your own value. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, and that person deserves to be seen, heard, and celebrated. Your dreams matter. Your contributions have value. You are not invisible unless you choose to be.